My name is Renata Osei and I am 62 years old. 41 years ago, my mother handed my younger sister the one thing I had spent my entire childhood being told would be mine. Not money, not property, but a name. A professional name. A legacy built by the woman who raised us both. The woman whose studio on Clement Street in San Francisco had trained 3 generations of dancers, and whose reputation in the Bay Area dance world was the closest thing our family had to a crown. My mother handed that name, that studio, and every certificate, photograph, and student roster attached to it to my sister Paulette, while I was 3,000 miles away in Atlanta, Georgia, caring for the woman who had actually built it all. What my mother did not know, what Paulette did not know, was that the woman they had both written off had spent the last 6 years of her life preparing for exactly this moment. And she had left everything she needed in a gray metal lockbox in the back of a closet that only I knew existed. Before I tell you what happened when I finally walked back through those studio doors, let me give you the picture. The studio was called Osei-Fontaine School of Dance. It had operated continuously since 1961. By the time this story reaches its turning point, it had produced 11 professional company dancers, 2 choreographers whose work had appeared on national stages, and a waiting list of 47 families hoping to enroll their daughters in the fall session. Its reputation was not an accident. It was the life's work of my grandmother, Celestine Osei-Fontaine, who had come from Accra to San Francisco in 1958 with a dance certificate from the Ghana National Cultural Center, $60 in a cloth envelope, and a belief so deep it bordered on doctrine that every child who moved through her studio doors deserved to be seen. My grandmother built that school with her hands, her savings, and 40 years of 6-day weeks. My mother inherited the building and the name. She did not inherit the philosophy. But here is what neither my mother nor Paulette knew when they signed those transfer papers on a Tuesday afternoon in March. My grandmother had visited a notary in the Sunset District on September 3, 2017, 16 months before she died, and she had not gone alone. Before I tell you what happened next, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if this story is speaking to something real in you. Drop your city and the time it is where you are right now in the comments. I read every single one of those, and I mean that. Now let me take you back to the beginning, to a studio that smelled of rosin and old wood floors, and to the grandmother who saw me when no one else thought to look. I was born in San Francisco in 1962, the eldest daughter of Josephine and Bernard Osei. My father worked the docks at the Port of Oakland for 23 years. My mother taught primary school and spent her evenings at the studio, where she functioned as my grandmother's bookkeeper, receptionist, and, when it suited her, heir apparent, though she had never once taken a dance class in her life. The studio was on Clement Street in the inner Richmond, a narrow Victorian storefront with a hand-painted sign above the door, and a bar that my grandmother had installed herself with a borrowed drill, and a level she still kept on a shelf in the back office. The floors were white oak, refinished every 3 years. The walls were hung with photographs going back to 1963, girls in recital costumes, girls at bar, girls caught mid-leap with the particular joy that only comes from a body doing exactly what it was made to do. I was 4 years old the first time my grandmother put my hand on that bar. I remember the wood was warm from the afternoon light. She stood behind me, adjusted my feet to first position, and said in that low, certain voice of hers, "Renata, you are not learning to dance. You are learning to listen. Your body already knows. We are just teaching it to speak clearly. I did not understand what she meant. But I felt something settle in my chest. Something that had no name yet, that I would spend the next 6 decades trying to describe. Paulette came along 4 years later. She was beautiful in the way that made people stop mid-sentence. Round face, wide eyes, a smile that asked for nothing and received everything. She had no particular gift for dance. Her timing was loose, her extensions modest, her interest in the work intermittent at best. But she had our mother's ear in a way I never did. Josephine Osei was a woman who organized her love like a filing system, efficient, categorical, and not always fair. Paulette was filed under beloved. I was filed under capable. There is a difference, and if you have lived inside that difference, you do not need me to explain it. Small examples, because the small ones are always the truest. When I was 9 and Paulette was 5, I was chosen to perform a solo at the studio's winter recital. I practiced that piece for 11 weeks. The night of the performance, my mother arrived 40 minutes late with Paulette in tow, sat in the back row, and spent the entire solo whispering to the woman beside her about Paulette's earache. My grandmother sat in the front row. She watched every second. Afterward, she found me backstage, cupped my face in both hands, and said, "I saw you, baby girl." Every single count. I held those 4 words for years. I still hold them. When I was 16, my grandmother began teaching me the administrative side of the studio, how to read a lease, how to manage student accounts, how to write a grant proposal for the arts funding the studio depended on every other year. She was deliberate about it, methodical. She would sit across from me at the desk in the back office, the one with the green banker's lamp and the drawer that stuck in humid weather, and walk me through every document as though she were transferring something more than information. "This studio runs on love," she told me once, on an October afternoon when the fog was thick against the window. "But love doesn't pay the liability insurance. You need to understand both." I took notes in a composition book. Blue cover. College ruled. I kept every one of those notebooks. My mother noticed my grandmother's investment in me and did not like it. She was not cruel about it. Josephine Osei was rarely openly cruel. She was skilled at the more refined instruments, the redirected compliment. The subject changed at precisely the right moment. The way she could make Paulette's most ordinary achievement fill a room, while my most significant one was absorbed into the wallpaper. When I was accepted into the San Francisco Ballet's Summer Intensive at 17, a program that accepted 14 students from the entire region, my mother's response at dinner was, "That's wonderful, Renata." "Paulette, tell your father about your history project." I did not cry. I did not say a single word. I passed the breadbasket and watched my grandmother across the table press her lips together and look at the ceiling for exactly 3 seconds. I attended San Francisco State University on a partial scholarship and studied dance education alongside kinesiology. I graduated in 1984. I came home expecting to step into the role my grandmother had been grooming me for, assistant director of the studio, with a path toward taking over when she eventually stepped back. My grandmother was 71 that year, still teaching 3 classes a week, still correcting the port de bras of 12-year-olds with the precision of a surgeon. She had spoken to me about the transition more than once. I had notes from those conversations. I had dates. What I did not have was my mother's agreement. Josephine had developed. Over the years I was away at college. A revised vision of the studio's future. In that vision, Paulette, who had dropped out of a community college cosmetology program, who had never taught a class, who could not read a balance sheet, was the natural heir. The reasoning, as my mother explained it to me in the kitchen of the house on 43rd Avenue on a Sunday afternoon in August of 1984, was delivered in the tone she used for self-evident truths. Paulette needs this more than you do. Renata, you're capable. You'll land on your feet. Paulette needs something to anchor her. I was 22 years old. I had just spent 4 years preparing for a specific future. I sat at that kitchen table for 11 seconds without speaking. Then I said, "Does Grandma know about this plan?" My mother refilled her coffee cup and said, "Your grandmother is getting older. These decisions are becoming mine to make." She was wrong about that. But neither of us knew it yet. My grandmother did not fight the battle openly. That was not her way. She was a woman who had navigated the San Francisco arts world as a Black immigrant woman in the 1960s. She understood that the loudest person in the room rarely wins the most important argument. What she did instead was continue teaching me, continue including me, and begin, quietly and without announcement, to visit an attorney named Dorothea Sims whose office was on Irving Street in the Sunset District. I did not know about those visits until much later. I did not know what was being prepared. I only knew that my grandmother, in the last years of her life, had a way of looking at me that felt like a promise. I left San Francisco in September of 1985. I had been offered a position as a dance educator with the Atlanta Public Schools, a job that came with a real salary, health insurance, and the particular dignity of being wanted somewhere. I took it. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself I would come back. I spent 37 years telling myself that. Atlanta was good to me in the ways that matter most. I built a life there that was genuinely mine. I taught dance at 4 different schools over the course of my career, eventually becoming the arts curriculum coordinator for the entire southwest cluster of the district. 12 schools, 41 teachers, a budget I managed down to the dollar. I met a man named Gerald Osei-Fontaine at a church potluck in 1991, a civil engineer with a quiet laugh and an absolute refusal to be rushed about anything. We married in 1993. We raised 2 daughters, Amara and Celia, in a house in East Point with a back porch that caught the afternoon light. It was a real life. A full one. I want you to understand that, because this story is not about what I lacked. It is about what was taken and what was returned. My grandmother called me every Sunday, without exception. For 37 years. The phone rang at 11 a.m. Pacific Time, and I answered it. And we talked for an hour about everything: the studio, the students, the grant applications, the new bar she'd had installed, the leak in the back office ceiling, the girl in the Thursday class who had something special if someone would only invest in her properly. Those calls were my thread back to the person I had been before I learned to make myself smaller. Celestine Osei-Fontaine was 91 years old when she died on a Tuesday morning in January of 2019. She died in her own bed, in the house on 43rd Avenue, with me beside her. I had flown out 3 weeks earlier when her health turned. I held her hand for the last 4 hours. My mother was in the living room. Paulette did not arrive until the afternoon. My grandmother's last coherent words to me, spoken 2 days before she died, were these: the gray box, back of the studio closet, behind the recital costumes from 1987. Dorothea has the key. Then she closed her eyes and slept. I did not open the closet. Not then. I was not ready, and something in me understood that the timing mattered. I stayed in San Francisco for 2 weeks after the funeral. I handled the arrangements, wrote the obituary, organized the reception, answered the letters that came from former students, 47 letters in 11 days, from women now in their 40s and 50s who wrote about what my grandmother had given them. I read everyone. I kept everyone in a manila folder I labeled Celestine. January 2019. My mother accepted condolences and made decisions about the catering. Paulette wore a beautiful black dress and cried in a way that photographed well. On the 14th day, I flew back to Atlanta. I did not go to the studio closet. I told myself I needed time. The truth is that I was afraid of what I would find, and more afraid of what I would have to do with it. I'm going to stop here for just a moment, because I think some of you watching this know exactly what I mean by that kind of afraid. Not afraid of bad news. Afraid of good news. Afraid that what's in that box is real, and that if it's real, you'll have to stop letting people treat you like it isn't. If you've ever held something in your hands that would change everything and set it down because you weren't sure you were ready to fight for yourself, drop the word "ready" in the comments. Just that one word. I want to know how many of us have been in that hallway, holding that door handle, not yet turning it. And if this story is finding you at the right time, please subscribe, because I have more of these to tell. Now, back to the story. For 6 months after my grandmother's funeral, things at the studio continued as they had been, which is to say, Paulette ran it with the particular combination of charm and chaos that characterized everything she touched. She taught a few classes. She hired an assistant. She changed the studio's social media presence and redecorated the waiting area in a shade of blush pink that my grandmother would have found bewildering. My mother handled the legal transfer of the building's operational license into Paulette's name, a process I learned about through a cousin's offhand comment at a family gathering in July of 2019. No one called me. No one consulted me. No one sent a letter. I found out about the name transfer, the formal, legal transfer of the Osei-Fontaine School of Dance trademark and all associated intellectual property, including the student records going back to 1961, from an email forwarded to me by accident. My cousin Delia, who worked part-time at the studio's front desk, had sent a message to the wrong address. It was dated August 14, 2019. The subject line was "New signage, final proof." The attachment was a design mock-up for a new sign above the studio door. The name had been changed. It now read Paulette Osei School of Dance. My grandmother's name, Fontaine, the name she had carried for 60 years, the name on the certificates of every student who had ever trained there, had been removed. Erased. As though she had never stood on those white oak floors. I sat at my kitchen table in East Point, Georgia, at 7:43 in the evening, and I looked at that mock-up for a long time. Gerald came in from the back porch, read my face the way he has always been able to, and sat down across from me without saying a word. I slid my phone across the table. He looked at the screen. He set the phone down and put his hand over mine. He did not say I'm sorry. He did not say what are you going to do. He said, Celestine would want you to open that box. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I booked a flight to San Francisco for the following Friday. I arrived at the studio on a Saturday morning in August. It was 9:17 a.m. Paulette was not there. She taught a Saturday class that didn't begin until 11. The assistant, a young woman named Brianna, who had been a student there years before, let me in. She knew who I was. She had been taught by my grandmother. She looked at me with an expression I recognized, the careful neutrality of someone who knows more than they're saying and is waiting to see if it's safe to say it. I went to the back closet. The recital costumes from 1987 were still there, wrapped in plastic, hanging in the far left corner, 11 tutus in varying shades of lavender and gold. Behind them, exactly where my grandmother had said, was a gray metal lockbox, approximately 12 inches wide, 8 inches deep. There was a combination lock on the front. I called Dorothea Sims from the closet. She answered on the second ring. She had been expecting my call for 6 months. Dorothea Sims was 74 years old, a retired attorney who had handled my grandmother's legal affairs since 1989. She gave me the combination over the phone. 4 digits. 1961. The year the studio opened. Of course it was. Inside the lockbox were 4 items. A notarized document dated September 3, 2017. A handwritten letter on my grandmother's personal stationery. A USB drive. And a smaller envelope sealed with red wax, addressed in my grandmother's handwriting to Renata. When you are ready. I sat on the floor of that closet, among the lavender tutus, and I read. The notarized document was a trademark assignment and intellectual property declaration, prepared by Dorothea Sims and witnessed by 2 independent parties. In it, my grandmother formally assigned the trademark Osei-Fontaine School of Dance, including all historical records, student rosters, photographic archives, and associated goodwill, to me, Renata Osei, as sole custodian and rights holder, effective upon her death. The document further stated that no subsequent transfer of the trademark by any other party would be legally valid without my written consent. My mother's transfer of the name to Paulette, executed in June of 2019, had been made without my consent. It had also been made in apparent ignorance of this document's existence, which meant it was not valid. Which meant the sign they were about to hang above the door was built on a foundation that did not exist. The USB drive contained 31 years of studio financial records, student enrollment data, grant documentation, and correspondence. Everything Dorothea and my grandmother had preserved as evidence of the studio's operational history and its founding legacy. 31 years. Every dollar. Every student. Every award. Every letter from the Arts Council. My grandmother had been building this archive since 1988. She had known, for 30 years, that this day might come. The handwritten letter was 4 pages. I am not going to read all of it to you. Some things belong only to the people they were written for. But I will tell you what she said at the end, because it is the part one carry with me every day. She wrote, Renata, I could not give you what you deserved while I was living, because the people who stood between us were people I loved, and I did not have the courage to hurt them the way the truth would have hurt them. That is my failing, not yours. What I can give you now is the truth on paper, witnessed and sealed, so that no one can say it is only your version of events. The studio is not a building. It is not a name. It is every child who ever stood at that bar and learned that her body was worth listening to. I built it. I am leaving it to the person I trust to protect what it means. I have always known that was you. I did not cry in that closet. I sat with the letter in my lap for 4 minutes and 40 seconds. And then I folded it carefully, placed it back in its envelope, and stood up. I called Dorothea back. I told her I was ready. She said, "I know. Your grandmother said you would be when you finally opened it." She told me that she had a colleague in San Francisco, an active intellectual property attorney named Marcus Webb, whom she had already briefed on the situation 2 years prior. At my grandmother's request, she gave me his number. I called him from the studio parking lot at 10:02 a.m. Marcus Webb was 53, calm, and precise in the way of people who have spent decades in rooms where precision is the only thing that matters. He told me that the trademark assignment my grandmother had executed in 2017 was airtight. He told me that my mother's 2019 transfer was likely voidable on its face. He told me that the first step was a formal cease and desist regarding the new signage, and the second step was a request for a meeting with all relevant parties, my mother, Paulette, and the studio's board of community advisors, a body my grandmother had established in 2003, and which still technically held oversight authority over the studio's name and educational mission. He told me he could have the cease and desist drafted by Monday morning. I said, "Monday morning is fine." My voice did not waver. I noticed that Paulette arrived at the studio at 10:47 a.m. I was sitting in the waiting area, in one of the chairs my grandmother had reupholstered in 1994, a deep burgundy fabric that had held its color for 25 years. Paulette stopped in the doorway and looked at me the way you look at something you hoped wouldn't be there. She was 58 years old, and she looked like our mother, the same high forehead, the same careful posture, the same practiced warmth that could be switched on and off like a lamp. "Renata," she said. "I didn't know you were coming." "I know," I said. She came in, set her bag down, and looked at me for a long moment. "Is this about the sign?" "Among other things," I said. "We should talk." She sat down. "We should," she agreed. And then she did what she had always done when a conversation threatened to become inconvenient. She changed the register entirely. Her voice softened. Her eyes went liquid. "Renata, I know this is hard. Losing Grandma was hard for all of us. But Mama made these decisions. It wasn't my place to." "Paulette," I said, "I'm not here to argue with you today. I'm here to let you know that there is a legal process beginning on Monday. Marcus Webb will be reaching out to you and to Mama before noon." She went very still. "Who is Marcus Webb?" "He's my attorney," I said. I stood up, picked up my bag, and smiled at her the way I had learned to smile at people who had underestimated me for 40 years, not unkindly, but without any apology in it whatsoever. "The sign should not go up," I said. "I'm telling you that as a courtesy, before the letter arrives." Then I walked out into the August morning and stood on Clement Street for a moment, in the fog that had come in off the bay, and I breathed. The meeting was held on a Thursday morning, September 12, 2019. Exactly 2 years to the day after my grandmother had sat with Dorothea Sims in the Sunset District and signed the document that made this moment possible. The studio's board of community advisors met in the back room, the same room where my grandmother had taught me to read Elise, where the green banker's lamp still sat on the desk, where the drawer still stuck in humid weather. There were 7 people at the table: Marcus Webb, Dorothea Sims joining by telephone, 3 board members, my mother, and Paulette. I sat at one end of the table. I had brought a folder, not a binder, just a plain manila folder, letter-sized, containing 3 documents: the notarized trademark assignment, a printed copy of the USB Archives Index, and a 1-page summary Marcus had prepared of the legal situation in plain language. I did not need the summary. I had brought it for the board members. My mother had dressed carefully. She was wearing a cream-colored blazer and the pearl earrings she saved for occasions that required what she called a certain presentation. She looked composed. She looked like a woman who expected to win. She had not yet read the cease and desist letter carefully enough to understand what she was actually facing. Paulette sat beside her, hands folded, wearing an expression of patient grievance, the look of someone who has decided in advance that whatever happens, they are the injured party. Marcus opened the meeting by distributing copies of the trademark assignment. He gave one to each board member, one to my mother, one to Paulette. He waited while they read. The room was quiet except for the sound of papers being turned and, from somewhere in the front of the studio, the faint recorded music from a class in progress, a waltz, something simple, something a beginner could follow. My grandmother had always started the youngest students with waltzes. 3/4 time. Forgiving. Steady. My mother read the document twice. I watched her face move through several stages: confusion, then calculation, then a particular kind of stillness that I recognized as the precursor to a performance. She set the papers down. "This document," she said, in the tone she used when she wanted to sound reasonable, while saying something unreasonable, "was prepared without the family's knowledge. Mama was not well in 2017. She was 90 years old." Dorothea's voice came through the phone speaker, clear and unhurried. "Mrs. Oh, I can confirm that Celestine Osei-Fontaine was assessed by her physician the week prior to signing this document. The assessment is on file. She was fully competent. I was present. 2 independent witnesses were present. The notary was present. The document meets every legal standard." My mother's jaw tightened. She was being influenced, she said. Renata was always. Josephine. I said her name quietly. Not loudly. Not with heat. Just clearly. She stopped. I had not called my mother by her first name in 40 years. "I am not here to argue about what Grandma intended," I said. "She wrote a letter explaining exactly what she intended. I have it. I am not going to read it aloud in this room, because she wrote it to me, not to you. But I will tell you this. She spent the last 30 years of her life making sure this studio would be protected. Not for our family. For the students. For the work. That is what the document says. That is what the archive on that USB drive supports. And that is what the board is here to determine today." I set my folder on the table. I did not open it. I did not need to. "The sign cannot go up," I said. "The name transfer is not valid. Those are legal facts. not opinions. What we decide to do from here, how we structure the studio's future, what role each of us plays. Those are questions I am genuinely willing to discuss. But the foundation has to be the truth. One of the board members, a woman named Harriet who had been a student at the studio in 1974 and had served on the board since 2005, looked at my mother for a long moment. Then she looked at me. "What do you want, Renata?" she asked. It was the right question. I had prepared for it. "I want the name restored," I said. Osei-Fontaine. As it has been for 58 years. I want the archive properly preserved and accessible. And I want a governance structure that reflects the studio's mission, the one my grandmother wrote down in 1961, in the original founding documents, which are also in that archive. I paused. I don't want to run the studio from Atlanta. I am not asking anyone to leave. I am asking for the truth to be the foundation of whatever comes next. Paulette spoke then, for the first time since the meeting began. Her voice was tight, controlled, but underneath it something was cracking. "You were gone, Renata. For 40 years, you were gone. I was here. I showed up. I helped Mama every week. And now you walk in with a piece of paper and..." "Paulette," I said. I kept my voice level. "I know you were here. I know what that cost you. And I know what you gave. I am not taking anything from you that was ever truly yours. I am only returning what was never yours to take." She looked at me for a long time. Something moved across her face that I had not seen there before. Not anger. Not calculation. Something older. Something that looked, if I am being honest, like grief. I did not look away. My mother said nothing more for the remainder of the meeting. She sat with her hands in her lap and her eyes on the table, and she let the board members ask their questions and let Marcus answer them. And she did not look at me again. Harriet called for a vote at 11:34 a.m. The board voted 3-0 to honor the trademark assignment and restore the studio's name. The new sign, which had been delivered to the studio the previous Friday and was sitting in the back room in its cardboard packaging, was returned to the sign company on Monday morning. I want to pause here one more time, because I think this is the part of the story where some of you might be wondering whether I felt triumphant in that room. Whether I felt the satisfaction of finally being seen, finally being right, finally having the document that proved what I had always known. I want to be honest with you. What I felt was tired. Not bitter tired. Not angry tired. Just the particular exhaustion that comes from carrying something for a very long time and finally being allowed to set it down. I thought about my grandmother in that moment, not the grandmother of the last years, fragile and careful, but the grandmother of my childhood, standing behind me at the bar, adjusting my feet, saying, "You are not learning to dance. You are learning to listen." I had been listening for 62 years. I had heard everything. Drop the word tired in the comments if you know what I mean by that kind of tired. The tired that isn't defeat, it's arrival. And if this story is speaking to something in you, please subscribe. There are more of these to tell, and I want you to be here for them. Now, back to the story. The aftermath was not dramatic. It rarely is, when the truth is the instrument. There were no screaming matches in parking lots, no doors slammed, no ultimatums delivered. What happened was quieter and, in its way, more permanent. The board engaged a studio director, a woman named Priscilla Osei, who had trained at the studio as a child and had spent 20 years directing a dance program at a community arts center in Oakland. Priscilla was 44 years old, organized, and deeply committed to the educational mission. She and I spoke by phone for 2 hours before she accepted the position. She understood what the studio was for. Paulette remained involved in a teaching capacity. She had, over the years, become a genuinely competent instructor of the younger children. And that was real. And it mattered. And I said so. I said it to the board and I said it to Paulette directly, in a conversation we had alone, the two of us, in the back office. After the formal meeting had ended, that conversation was the hardest one. Not because Paulette was cruel in it. She wasn't. She was honest, which was harder. She told me that she had always known, somewhere underneath everything, that the studio was supposed to be mine. She told me that our mother had spent years convincing her otherwise, and that she had let herself be convinced because it was easier than examining what that meant. She told me she was sorry. Not in the performed way. Not in the way that asks for absolution. In the way that acknowledges a debt that cannot be fully repaid. I told her I hurt her. I told her I was not there to collect. I told her that what I wanted was for the studio to survive, and for the girls who came through those doors to receive what my grandmother had always intended to give them. She nodded. She looked out the window at Clement Street for a long moment. Then she said, "She loved you best. You know, Grandma." She never said it, but everyone knew. I looked at her for a moment. "She loved us both," I said. "She just trusted me differently." That's not the same thing. Paulette was quiet for a while. Then she said, "I know." And I believed her. My mother never apologized. I want to be clear about that, because I think it matters to tell the truth about the parts that don't resolve cleanly. Josephine Osei is 84 years old. She lives in the house on 43rd Avenue. She calls me occasionally, on holidays and birthdays, and we speak in the careful, neutral way of people who have chosen civility over closeness, because closeness would require a reckoning neither of us is certain she is capable of. She has never said she was wrong. She has never acknowledged what was taken or what it cost. I have stopped waiting for her to. That is not resignation. That is the decision to locate my peace somewhere she cannot reach it. Gerald and I flew back to San Francisco in October of 2019, and again in the spring of 2020, and again the following fall. We have made that trip every year since. I serve as an unpaid advisor to the studio's board, which means I read the financial reports, attend the annual planning meetings, and occasionally sit in the back of a Thursday afternoon class and watch 12-year-olds learn to listen to their bodies. The studio's name is on the door again, exactly as it was. Osei-Fontaine School of Dance. Gold letters on a black background. The same design my grandmother chose in 1961. Priscilla had it restored by the same sign company that had made the original, Harriet. The board member who called the vote that morning sent me a card afterward. Handwritten. On plain cream stationery. She wrote, "Your grandmother used to say that the work would outlast all of us if we did it right. I think she was right. I think she was also right about you." I have that card in the manila folder with the letters from the former students. The ones that came after the obituary. 47 letters. I reread them sometimes. when I need to remember what the studio is actually for. My daughter Amara visited San Francisco with me last spring. She is 30 years old. She stood at the bar in the main studio on a Saturday morning, in the same spot where I had stood at 4 years old with my grandmother's hands adjusting my feet. And she looked at the photographs on the wall, the girls in recital costumes, the girls mid-leap, the certificates and the awards and the 60 years of documented work. And she said, "This is what you came from?" I said yes. She looked at me for a moment. Then she said, "I'm glad you went back for it." I thought about that for a long time afterward. I went back for the studio. I went back for my grandmother's name. I went back for the truth, which had been sitting in a gray metal lockbox behind the 1987 recital costumes, waiting for me to be ready. But I also went back for the 4-year-old girl who stood at that bar and felt something settle in her chest that had no name yet. I went back for her. I went back to tell her that she was right to feel it, right to hold it, right to carry it all those years across 3,000 miles and 41 years of Sundays. She was right. The wood was warm. The light was good. Her body already knew. If you are watching this and you have been told, in one way or another, that the thing you built or the name you earned or the place you belong was not really yours, I want you to hear this. Documentation is not aggression. Knowing your rights is not selfishness. Standing in the room and saying, "This is what the truth is not cruelty, even when the people across the table need it to be. You do not have to be loud. You do not have to be hard. You only have to be ready. And ready doesn't mean fearless. It means you open the lockbox anyway." My grandmother spent 30 years preparing for a moment she would not live to see. She trusted me to see it for her. I did. I am 62 years old, and I am still learning to listen the way she taught me. But I know this much: the work outlasts all of us, if we do it right. Drop a comment below and tell me what you're holding on to. Tell me what you're not quite ready to open yet. And if this story found you at the right time, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.